You always mistook silence for support, Alice. But the truth is, we never pushed you away. We simply stopped pretending. You were never part of this legacy. You were an experiment, a deviation, something we tolerated, hoping you'd eventually outgrow your delusions. And yet, here you are, dressed like success, waving numbers around like they can substitute for dignity. Those were my mother's words, right in the middle of what they called a family intervention. It's heartbreaking when the cruelest words come from the very person who gave you life. Has anyone here ever been torn down by the people who were supposed to love you most? If so, then this story is for you. As the tires of my Audi crunched into the curbside gravel, I took a breath that wasn't quite calming. The Harper mansion loomed behind me. Pristine white facade, pruned hedges, windows that held too many memories behind glass. I pulled out my phone and typed with deliberate fingers. Finalize Tokyo and time the entrance at 7:30. It's war. Jenna's reply was just a single thumbs-up emoji. She understood. She always did. I stepped out, heels clicking softly against the sidewalk, each one echoing like a countdown. My navy Zara suit hugged my frame. Deliberate, minimalist, and completely out of sync with what they'd expect. I reached the grand oak doors at exactly 6:59 p.m. They were already waiting, like a jury. The living room had been rearranged. All the vintage leather chairs had been pulled into a semicircle. A fake olive tree in the corner added a weird Mediterranean aftertaste to the tense New York air. My mother sat front and center, wearing pearls and a concerned expression she must have practiced. Margaret Harper never cried, but she knew how to weaponize disappointment. Zara? Diana scoffed, her eyes dragging along my outfit. Bold choice. I smiled, smooth and practiced. Sustainable, like this family, I hope. No one laughed. Sit, Alice, my father said. Richard Harper Sr. didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. His authority came with his surname and the fact that he still signed paychecks for half the room. I sat. There was a faint clink as my Patek Philippe tapped the glass tabletop. Deliberate. Accidental. I placed my phone face down. Not to hide anything. To control the tempo. You walked away from the firm, he continued. And the life we gave you. That wasn't rebellion, Alice. It was regression. Regression. I nodded slowly, as if filing the term for future dissection. You had a seat on the legal board. You had a place in the Harper succession plan, added Aunt Evelyn, swirling her wine like she wasn't the real estate equivalent of an unpaid billboard. You traded it all for what? Emails and coffee runs? Daniel chuckled. Always the golden boy. Executive assistants in Brooklyn make what, 70 grand max? 75, I corrected softly. Then I glanced at my watch. 7:24 p.m. My heart didn't race. It paced. Enough dancing around, my mother said, hands folded on her lap. We care. That's why we're stepping in. I tilted my head, just a fraction. You've been adrift, Alice, my father said. Which is why we've arranged something. Wallace & Sons is willing to reconsider you. Of course, you'll start smaller this time, assistant counsel under Daniel's supervision. Earn back our trust, Victoria added like a closing argument. I looked around the room, all those eyes scanning me for signs of surrender. I inhaled once, gently. Then I chuckled. It wasn't loud, but it sliced. I've already scheduled something bigger, I said, brushing invisible dust from my sleeve. It arrives in 6 minutes. And then I leaned back in the chair, watch ticking audibly now, as silence wrapped around the Harper legacy like a fuse about to spark. We're here because we love you, Alice, Daniel began, the most dishonest sentence of the evening. I didn't bother responding. I'd learned over the years that silence made them nervous. It forced them to fill in the gaps with what they feared I might be thinking. The fireplace crackled a little too enthusiastically behind them, casting shadows across the crystal decanter and untouched plates of lamb. Someone had spent too much time selecting the wine, but not enough deciding if this was supposed to be dinner or a trial. The air reeked of judgment masked as concern. My mother leaned forward, clutching her glass like it grounded her. You had promise once. Remember, Stuart? I nodded once, the corner of my mouth twitching. I remembered Stuart. His company had gone up in flames last week, thanks to a leveraged play made by a firm based in Tokyo. My firm. He's managing director now, she added, pulling up his LinkedIn profile on her phone like a proud aunt. Still single. And stable. Daniel snorted. That's the bar now? Single and stable? Evelyn joined in, always ready to throw gasoline. Barbara's daughter just made partner at Goldman. At 32. Could have been you. I glanced at her wine. Half full, swirling, dark. She didn't know it yet, but tonight it would be the last time she'd talk down to me like that. Look, let's talk numbers, Daniel said, tapping into his phone with performative precision. Executive assistant median salary in New York, 72,000, maybe 80 with overtime, which is modest. But maybe that's what you need. A reset. Dad cleared his throat. That was always his prelude to something rehearsed. No more silly ventures, he said. No more secrecy. We've seen what happens when you're left unsupervised. I caught a flicker in his eyes, not just disappointment. Fear. Maybe he'd started to sense that I wasn't here to beg. He reached into a leather folder and pulled out an envelope, placed it gently, like a weapon, on the coffee table. Interviews set for Thursday. Junior marketing at Wallace & Sons. We pulled some strings. Mom nodded like a co-conspirator. Think about it, sweetheart. Your future needs guidance. The envelope stared back at me. Cream-colored, thick paper. My name written in confident strokes. They really believed I'd see it as a lifeline. I looked at the clock. 7:30. I did think about it, I said softly, brushing a crumb from my sleeve. For 3 years. A beat. Then, a knock at the door. My father frowned, unamused. Who? Before anyone could stand, the door opened and in walked Jenna. Armani suit, heels that didn't apologize for their height, and a poise that made the whole room shrink. Apologies, she said, not looking at anyone else. Miss Harper, the Tokyo team confirmed the $2.3 billion acquisition. The Gulfstream is prepped, and Forbes has finalized approval on the cover. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the tile. Daniel looked like someone had cut his Wi-Fi. Dad didn't speak. He couldn't. Jenna turned to me with a slight nod, as if all of this were perfectly routine. She wasn't just delivering news. She was delivering judgment, and none of them had passed. I'm not here to argue, I said, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen. I'm here to sign what's mine. The room was still thick with the aftershock from Jenna's announcement. Victoria crouched by the shattered glass like her world had fractured with it. Daniel hadn't said a word since the phrase, $2.3 billion acquisition, exited Jenna's lips. Aunt Evelyn was visibly recalibrating her facial expression, trying to look intrigued instead of humiliated. But it was Dad's silence that mattered most. His eyes didn't leave the table, didn't even rise when Jenna placed the documents in front of me. The first was the contract. The second was the cover of Forbes. Alice Harper, the hidden architect of AI capital. The third and the thin booklet and was Harper Technology's valuation report. $14 billion, triple what Wallace & Sons had been worth at its peak. You called me a secretary, I said softly, flipping to the signature page. That job funded a $14 billion empire. The pen felt heavier in my hand than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the moment pressing down on everything. Jenna stood to my right, cool and composed, flipping to the second page. The acquisition was finalized at 6:52 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, she said. As of Friday, Harper Technologies will own a 68% controlling stake in Wallace & Sons. Mom gasped, her pearl necklace trembling slightly against her blouse. This is not possible. Do you remember? I interrupted. My AI proposal in 2021? The one you dismissed after 2 minutes? I nodded toward my father. You said it was too soon. I call it timely. Jenna held up the original proposal, still bearing Dad's red X on the first page. Rejected without discussion, she noted. There was a moment, almost cinematic, when I heard the wind pick up outside, rustling the hedges just beyond the massive windows. For a second, it sounded like applause. I've worked in silence, I continued, my voice steady. Underestimated, dismissed. And every moment, every snub, I banked it. Dad's hand twitched toward the envelope he had so confidently placed earlier. I ignored it. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for clarity. Jenna slid the final page forward. This agreement, I said, tapping the bold heading, is notarized, approved by Morgan Stanley's executive board, signed off by Time Magazine's legal, and filed with the SEC this morning. I clicked the Mont Blanc open, the exact same pen Dad once gave me with the line, "Your signature defines your worth." The ink flowed. As I signed my name, my eyes caught the broken wine glass on the floor, red liquid seeping into the grout like a wound they couldn't clean. I closed the folder. Effective Friday, I said, straightening. Wallace & Sons is under Harper Technologies. As CEO, I'll chair the upcoming board meeting. Daniel made a strangled sound, part disbelief, part desperation. Dad stood up at last, slow, shoulders stiff. You planned this? I met his eyes for the first time all evening. Calm, firm, undeterred. 2 weeks ago, I said, glancing at Jenna. We rehearsed it right here. Then I turned to the room and smiled. You just provided the audience. This boardroom taught me silence, I said, plugging in the USB. Today, I'll teach it consequence. No one dared interrupt. The mahogany walls were exactly as I remembered them, polished to a shine that masked decades of ego and arrogance. The same yellow lighting buzzed overhead, casting long shadows over faces that once looked through me. 15 chairs, 14 men, 1 woman, and me, at the head. 3 years ago, I stood here as a junior analyst, too young, too ambitious, and far too optimistic. I had introduced an AI integration proposal that could have saved this company. Daniel had cut me off halfway through the second slide, muttering something about overcomplicating legacy systems. Dad had said nothing, just stared over his reading glasses like I was a stranger who'd wandered in from the wrong decade. But this time, no one moved when I clicked the remote. Behind me, the screen came to life. Crisp bar charts, balance sheets, and bleeding red lines. Jenna spoke first, stepping forward in a tailored suit with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Wallace & Sons has experienced a 40% valuation drop in the past 2 years, she said. In Q4 last year alone, $23.5 million was lost on a failed expansion initiative targeting the Asian market, without local insight or language adaptation. The board members shifted. Some straightened. A few scribbled notes. I advised against that expansion, Dad said, tone cool. It wasn't my decision. No, I agreed. It was Daniel's. Daniel looked up, indignant. What's your point? Jenna pulled out a second report, sliding it down the table. Our internal review traced multiple advisory payments to a consulting firm that doesn't exist. A shell company, registered in Delaware. The room fell dead silent. I took a breath and laid a single sheet on the table. My original AI proposal. The same font, the same graphs, updated only with 1 line at the top. Rejected, April 2021. You were offered a solution, I said, tapping the page. But you chose nostalgia. A few murmurs rose from the far end of the table, whispers of, how did we miss this? And she was here the whole time? We now control 67% of Wallace & Sons, I said clearly. Effective immediately, Harper Technologies will chair the board. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking over his glass of water. You can't fire me, this is a family company. Exactly, I said, voice unwavering. And you failed it more than anyone else. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Jenna opened a leather folder and passed copies of the audit report down both sides of the table. Daniel Harper, she said calmly, authorized 3 separate transfers totaling $1.2 million to the Delaware entity. No deliverables, no invoices, no staff. Sweat dotted Daniel's forehead. This is ridiculous. You have 2 options, I interrupted. Resign, with a silence package. I let that linger. Or, we refer this to the SEC. They do love stories like these. The board members were no longer silent. One by one, heads nodded. When the vote came, it wasn't close. It was unanimous. Daniel sat down like the air had been pulled from his lungs. No one clapped. No one smiled. The reckoning had come, and I didn't need to raise my voice. Your mother made your childhood favorite, Dad said, as if truffle risotto could erase 3 years of exile. I stared at the porcelain plate in front of me. The steam curled upward like a silent bribe, delicate and intentional, just like everything else in this house. The Harper mansion hadn't changed. The fireplace still roared with choreographed warmth. The Hermes scarf lay folded beside my seat, next to a Bordeaux that had been uncorked just long enough to breathe, but not long enough to forget. Mom smiled too wide. I kept it safe, she said, handing me the scarf like an heirloom passed through generations of honesty. I tilted my head. You said it was tacky, called it a desperate splash of color from someone trying to be relevant. Her smile faltered for half a second, not long enough to register if you didn't know her like I did. Evelyn piped up, swirling her wine. I always said you had potential, Alice, remember? I used to tell your mother, just wait. She'll bloom. I tapped my phone once. The recording played clearly. Evelyn's voice from last week's meeting, sharp and cold. She's embarrassing the family. Can we keep her out of the photos? The silence that followed was richer than the wine. Dad cleared his throat. You could have come back sooner. We were worried. I raised an eyebrow. No, you were disappointed. That's different. He looked at me again, a little longer this time, like trying to find traces of the daughter he once curated. I held his gaze without blinking. I didn't come back, I said, voice steady, because I wasn't ready to watch you pretend. And now I am. The room swallowed that sentence. Jenna appeared at the edge of the hallway like a shadow made of precision. She handed me a slim envelope, her Armani suit impeccable as ever. Tokyo signed, she said. And Time magazine just greenlit the cover. Congrats, Miss Harper. She nodded and disappeared before anyone could ask questions, like always. I lifted my glass, allowing the flickering candlelight to dance on its rim. To Sunday dinners, I said, voice soft but deliberate, where everyone suddenly remembers how much they love me. I didn't need a toast back. The silence was the agreement. Then Dad reached beneath his chair and unfolded today's Wall Street Journal. He placed it between us, the cover facing up. A photo of me, sharp suit, arms crossed in front of the Wallace & Sons logo. The headline in bold, "The takeover nobody saw coming." He said nothing, just looked. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for his approval. You built a legacy, I told him. I built the future. The sun had just broken through the gray, overcast sky, casting pale streaks of light across the glass walls of the top floor. From where I sat, Manhattan looked like a board game. Towers like tokens, people like whispers. The city moved, but I was still. He stepped in without knocking. My father. His suit was navy, crisp, identical to the one he wore when I was 12, and he told me business wasn't a place for feelings. In his hand was the folder. Retirement papers, 2 inches thick but feather light compared to the weight he used to carry. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked around. At the polished steel, at the minimalist furniture, at the media team adjusting lights in the next room, at the Harper Technologies crest etched into the glass behind my chair. Finally, he said, "They want my signature." I nodded. "They do. I slid a single page across the desk. Not the retirement agreement. A scan of his handwriting, dated April 2021, from the rejection letter he gave me when I first pitched the AI proposal. Too early, too risky, too Harper. His eyes skimmed the page and stopped. I was too Harper, I said. That's why it worked. His jaw tightened, but he didn't refute it. That was new. I reached for the Mont Blanc pen, the same one he gave me when I turned 18, engraved with my initials but never used. Until now. I signed the retirement package slowly, deliberately. Every letter a reclamation. Then I looked up. This time, my signature defines yours. He took the folder, but not the pen. He didn't thank me. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. Some silences carry more weight than words. He turned to go, but paused at the door, glancing back one last time, like he might say something paternal. But nothing came. He left. The door didn't close all the way. Jenna walked in right on cue, tablet in hand, heels clicking with quiet authority. "Singapore's on the line," she said, not looking up. "They want a preview of the AI prototype." I smiled. "Let's show them what a secretary can do." She nodded. And I rose to walk into the conference room where the lights had already been adjusted, the screens primed, and the future, finally, had my name on it. The room she once stood in as a dismissed voice had transformed into a stage. And this time, she wasn't the one being judged. The same table where her ideas were once silenced now bore the weight of contracts, balance sheets, and undeniable truth. Those who once prided themselves on legacy sat still, watching the very woman they tried to reshape into their image quietly rebuild everything in hers. Alice Harper had been labeled many things: too ambitious, too emotional, not realistic, and most condescending of all, a secretary. But labels don't define futures. Actions do. She didn't just return for revenge. She returned with results, armed not with resentment, but with record-breaking numbers, international deals, and the very AI platform her family once ridiculed, now hailed as industry-defining. At every turn, they had underestimated her. They assumed silence meant surrender, that walking away was weakness, that working in the shadows meant she had disappeared. But the truth is, Alice never left the game. She simply changed the board. While they clung to hierarchy and nostalgia, she built networks, took calculated risks, and shaped a company that saw beyond surnames. Her return wasn't just poetic justice. It was a demonstration that the fight for dignity doesn't require fury. It requires clarity. She didn't need to raise her voice, slam her fists, or demand apologies. The numbers spoke. The headlines echoed. And the silence around the dinner table, once filled with judgment and whispers, now brimmed with awe and confusion. But beneath the surface victory was something more enduring, a refusal to be erased. Alice never wanted revenge. What she wanted, and deserved, was to be seen, on her own terms. To be taken seriously, not because of her bloodline, but because of her ideas. Her story wasn't about triumph over family, but triumph over the frameworks that sought to limit her. And in breaking those, she made space for others like her, misjudged, overlooked, quietly brilliant, to believe that their moment, too, could come. Injustice is rarely loud. It happens in polite words, closed doors, tight smiles, and forced choices. But justice, when it arrives, carries a weight no accusation can match. It doesn't knock. It walks in with documents signed, teams mobilized, and futures secured. And when it sits down, as Alice did, it no longer asks for a seat. It redefines the table. This wasn't a story of one woman rising above. It was a story of what happens when the world underestimates the wrong person for too long. It's a reminder that titles mean little without ethics, that family is not an excuse for manipulation, and that healing sometimes looks like walking away, and sometimes like walking back in with a plan. Perhaps the greatest lesson here is this. When injustice is met with unwavering clarity and quiet courage, the verdict doesn't just restore what was lost, it redefines what is possible. And maybe that's why the final scene didn't need applause, just respect. If this story struck a chord, don't let it end here. Like this video if you believe quiet strength can change everything. Subscribe for more powerful, true to life stories that challenge betrayal, reclaim dignity, and redefine success. There are so many more untold stories coming of women rising, of justice served, of legacies rewritten. You won't want to miss what's next. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming undeniable. You were never part of the legacy, Sarah. You were the family errand, something we tolerated until it outlived its usefulness. We didn't mock your little shop out of cruelty. We did it because it reminded us just how far beneath this family you really were. Those were the words of my mother, the same woman who once taught me how to pronounce the word legacy, as I poured wine at a dinner table I now owned, signed into my name. If you've ever been treated like a burden by your own family, dismissed, diminished, or laughed at for daring to dream bigger, then this story is for you. Because sometimes the clearest response isn't shouting. It's a signed transfer of ownership. And the silence of an entire room. I arrived just before dinner, as always, with a maple pecan tart balanced in one hand and the practiced neutrality of a diplomat stitched into my face. The Sinclair home in Evanston hadn't changed in years. The same gilded mirrors, the same polished mahogany banister, the same faint scent of expensive candles that tried too hard to smell like nostalgia. Chloe was the first to spot me. "Oh, Sarah's here. Wow, and right on time. Did traffic delay your Uber delivery routes?" Her laugh, bright and brittle, echoed louder than necessary. I smiled and set the tart down next to the gilded pie stand. "Actually, I drove myself. Business is doing well enough to afford my own car now," I said, brushing off my coat. Across the room, my mother's voice cut through the low hum of cocktail chatter. "Sarah, darling, so glad you made it. Your boutique's still open, I hope?" I turned to face her. Vivian Sinclair stood poised in her tailored navy blazer, martini in hand, the picture of corporate precision. Her voice was velvet wrapped around steel. "I heard small businesses struggled this quarter, especially passion projects." "It's doing just fine," I replied evenly. "We've grown 18% this quarter. Just finalized an international commission last week." "Ah," Chloe jumped in. "So we're doing Etsy globally now?" I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because I knew it unnerved them when I didn't flinch. "Actually, our latest line is curated by an art collective in Amsterdam. But yes, call it Etsy if it helps." The living room buzzed with murmurs. My father gave me a nod from the fireplace, silent and watchful as always. Evelyn, seated with impeccable posture in her wingback chair, merely lifted a brow. She didn't speak much, but she never missed anything. Dinner was served promptly at 6. Crystal glasses chimed, silver cut through turkey, and conversation rolled along polished rails of polite disdain. The Sinclair tradition was alive and well. Roast, red wine, and razor-edged commentary. "Startup culture is so unpredictable," Chloe said between sips of Pinot. "It's all about trends. One minute you're hot, the next you're a TikTok fail." I glanced up from my plate. "You'd be surprised how consistent things are when you're building something with integrity." Vivian placed her fork down with precision. "Speaking of consistency, Valeris is entering final talks with a new partner. If it closes, I may be stepping up. EVP is on the table." A round of congratulations erupted. I offered a polite smile. "You know," Chloe added with an air of helpfulness, "PR is always looking for fresh talent. You have a good face. Maybe something part-time to ease you into the real world?" I met her gaze squarely. "Thanks. I think tonight's internal email might change a few things." A hush rippled across the table. Chloe laughed. What? Did you land an interview? I sipped my wine slowly. Something like that. My mother tilted her head. The look she gave me wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity wrapped in calculation. She smelled smoke but hadn't yet seen the fire.